Hi, the title of this lecture is called Blistering Mohangu's Penis to Protect Morality, Some Perspectives from Guyana on Queering the Caribbean. And during the lecture, I'll tell you who Mohangu is. My name is Vidyart Kisoon, and I live in Georgetown, Guyana. And this presentation is being done for the Sexualities in Queering the Caribbean course held at Ryerson University in Canada during this semester in January 2018. Before I start, I'd like to do some invocations, and I'm Hindu, and it's usually in a tradition, perhaps in many rituals, where we do invocations before we start anything. Um, so first of all, I'd like to invoke the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgendered, intersex, queer, and questioning people. Those who lived their truth, those who were killed, maimed, and penalized for that truth, and those who've managed to survive. Those who find a way to live in the Caribbean, and those who've had to leave while still trying to maintain connections and sometimes desires and hopes of returning later. I'm invoking all those who have taught and who continue to educate me, especially those activists who I might disagree with from time to time, but who have not blocked me from their social media accounts. I'm invoking the other people, activists, scholars, artists, academics, allies, religious people, citizens who believe that the Caribbean can be a place which accepts diversity in sexual orientation and gender identity. I also want to invoke those who practice homophobia in different forms, those who have appealed to Donald Trump, and I'll show that letter later. Those who appeal to Donald Trump to save them from gay marriage and from their fellow citizens enjoying rights and equality. And I wish them peace and enlightenment. I'd like to extend my appreciation to Dr. Critchlow for inviting me to do this. And this, of course, is a video creation instead of a remote lecture, as I was not sure of electricity and connectivity at the time we would have had to do the lecture. Please note that I had to use a free screen recorder, so there is a watermark throughout the video. And please forgive any quirks and variations in quality. And who am I about me? So as I said, I live and work in Guyana. Um, I was born here. I am involved in work and have been involved in the work to promote gender equality, child protection, and social justice generally. And that work started in 1994. And since 2001, I became interested in equality, in the work for equality for LGBTIQQ citizens. I'm deliberately using LGBTIQQ because it's complex to describe all the different um, letters. Well, one of the things that I know is that queer is not necessarily a Caribbean word, and it's not necessarily understood all over the Caribbean. It's not necessarily used, and identity is complex. So I've had various roles during my time. I've been involved in organizations, and I'm no longer actively involved in any organization. And now I'm coordinator of the Caribbean IRN. It was a network created for academic scholars, and so to sort of to keep people connected, especially with the diaspora, in terms of research, art, writing, work that is going on. So in the next hour or less, I hope, what I want to do is a couple of things. I'm going to locate Guyana within the Caribbean. I don't know how many of the people viewing this video or how many of the students know where Guyana is or have heard about Guyana before. I like to look at the historical references to LGBTIQQ lives in Guyana so that people can understand that just as has been for Guyana, it must have been for the rest of the Caribbean where people have been here all the time. I'll talk a little bit about the laws and living within the laws and how sometimes there are these accommodations made even if laws aren't being changed. I'm going to talk about God's involvement in the work to deal with discrimination against LGBTIQQ citizens. And at the end, I'll describe some Caribbean IRN resources which you might find useful. And of course, I think in the discussion with Dr. Cucciolo, we could pause and ask questions or have a Q&A to follow up. I don't know how it would be watching a video for 1 hour, so I appeal to those of you, keep stretching, yawning, do whatever you have to do to maintain interest. This is not my usual way of performing. So the Caribbean and Guyana. So I did this screenshot of Googling images Caribbean, and of course this is what you see: blue seas and sand and travel to this Caribbean. Guyana does not have blue seas; we have muddy brown water. And I think many of you would probably be aware that the Caribbean is a little bit more complex than just this. So you might have heard the Caribbean, oh gosh, it's this place with homophobia, Jamaica, all of these um, things happening. And I think last week, Maurice Tomlinson would have shared with you the history of the legislation and the issues of the legislation within the English speaking Caribbean. But what I did was I did this map. I like maps. I did this map which tries to show the kind of complexity. And first of all, so the Caribbean is not just the islands and the sea. They're the territories of Belize, Guyana, and Suriname, the land territories, which are considered part of the Caribbean because of historical reasons in the case of Guyana and Belize because of its the British colonialism. So it's a link with the English-speaking Caribbean. And then Suriname, I think, because of its uniqueness in South America as being the only Dutch-speaking country, they're part of the political Caribbean community. So in this map, we have red shows the countries where there's criminalization of same-sex activity. The purple lavender shows where there are court cases in progress or some legal challenges happening or advocacy, which seems positive to change some laws and policies. Um, the blue shows where there's no penalization or a positive judgment has been made, as in the case of Belize. And yellow shows those places which, because of their perhaps links still to Europe, to the colonial powers, they have to recognize gay marriages and partnerships. And when I open up back the map and show the archipelago of red and yellow, which is in the Eastern Caribbean, remember yellow is where there is some recognition of partnerships and so on, and red is where there's criminalization of the activity, right? So this is this complex Caribbean map with different colors showing what happens. So where is Guyana in this? It's on the north coast of South America. It's the only English speaking, as I said, so it's linked to the Anglo-Caribbean. 1966 we gained independence. There are about 750,000 or so people living here and quite a large number in the diaspora in North America especially. We have 216,000 square miles with territorial disputes with neighboring Venezuela and Suriname. And our people consist of descendants of indigenous peoples, enslaved peoples from Africa, and indentured and other immigrants from India, China, and Europe. And there were also indentured immigrants from Africa. Sorry, there were other immigrants who came from Africa as well who were not enslaved. We're the only country in South America which criminalizes same-sex relations, and oil is being discovered rapidly. And I personally think that there's a threat of oil which is looming, which we have to deal with. Right. So this is a map of the Caribbean. This is a Google map, which the Caribbean IRN is working on. The intention is to show the organizations and the alliances and the networks and the groups which are in the Caribbean countries that I showed you just now, who are the organizations who are trying to do work to deal with the discrimination against LGBT citizens. And there's different organizations, the range of work. It's not just doing court work and advocacy and letter writing. Sometimes there are creative ways of organizing festivals, encounters, um, art, poetry events, different events, and also participating in cultural events. And So here, here it is that we have this whole range. You remember I showed this archipelago of red and yellow um, uh, colors in the last map. But there are, just like St. Lucia has United and Strong, Barbados has Equals, and many different ones. And I think over the course of the lecture series, you're going to meet people from different countries who will be talking about their experience. So in Guyana, there is the Guyana Trans United group of dealing with transgender issues. There's SASA, the Society Against Sexual Orientation Discrimination, and I was involved in SASA from its founding to 2012, and I was involved in programming the film festival up to that time. There's GAIBO, another organization which is doing currently some work on LB, lesbian, bisexual, transgendered women. And there are other network support groups set up in connection with other, with other service providers, and so who can provide counseling, health services, and things like that. So Guyana maintains the Victorian legislation from the 1800s. This is from the Criminal Law Offences Act, Section 351. Any male person who in public or private commits or is party to the commission or procures or attempts to procure the commission by any male person of any act of gross indecency with any other male person shall be guilty of a misdemeanor and liable to imprisonment for 2 years. So, in other words, if two men hug up, cuddle, kiss in public or private and they're found out, they can be arrested. And, because gross indecency is not necessarily defined in the legislation. Section 352 refers to attempts to commit burglary or assaults any person with intent to commit burglary or indecent assault. And then this is a felony which has imprisonment for 10 years. And Section 353 talks about everyone who commits burglary either with a human being or with any other living creature shall be liable to imprisonment for life. And this is still in the statute books. Now, for a while, the Section 352 and 353 were often used when it was an act of rape. And our Sexual Offences Act now has a definition, a gender neutral definition of rape and a broad definition of rape, which is not restricted to, which includes non-consent, all forms of non-consensual sex. And then our Summary Jurisdiction Offences Act in Section 53 penalizes what we call cross-dressing. So being a man in any public way or public place for any improper purpose appears in female attire, or being a woman in any public way or public place for any improper purpose appears in male attire. So here, and this is where the constitutional challenge was raised by transgender citizens to challenge this law. And this is going on because the whole case hangs upon this definition of what improper purpose is. And there are other offenses listed in a particular section. For example, you shouldn't, in a public way or public place in any town, beat or shake any mat between 7 in the morning and 6 in the afternoon. And in any public way, fly any kite or play at any game. And there are a couple of other offenses, all left over from the Victorian times. Things like you mustn't roll a barrel down the street and things like that. So this is the kind of legal framework which governs how, which governs the homophobia, which nurtures the homophobia. So in this next section, I'm going to move on to, I'm just talking about the mentioning of LGBTIQQ lives in the archives related to Guyana. Because this is really important, because in our part of the world, very often these stories are hidden and you're hearing about all these things about it's new, people are coming and this is all new and this is American and Western and white people bringing things to Guyana which we never had. Now, this is in 1898. Gayatri Bahadur wrote a book called Kuli Woman about her one of her ancestors' journeys to Guyana. Between 1838 and 1917, laborers were brought from India to work in the colonies, the British colonies in the Caribbean, to work on the sugar plantations. And this is one ship under Mercy. This is a record of the ship's surgeon punishment. Nabibok stated that for the last 10 years he had allowed men to commit acts of beastliness. He had no doubt induced Mohangu to do this criminal act. Nabibak was put in irons, and Mohangu, after blistering his penis, was made to holy stone from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. daily. Holy stone apparently was the ship's language for scrubbing the decks. So this was the punishment under the Victorian. So I talked about blistering Mohangu's penis to protect morality. This was the punishment. Mohangu and Nabibak arrived in Guyana. One was they were both assigned to different plantations, and I think if we continue, it would be interesting to find what happened to them afterwards. But thanks to Gayutra, we have on in the digital library of the Caribbean collection, we have images of the notes of this trial and what happened to the ship surgeon was actually penalized for administering too severe punishment. In 1903, 19-year-old Rukmini, who came on the ship the Clyde to Guyana, is listed as hermaphrodite on the certificate. In 1959, long before Stonewall in the USA, there is a report of an all-male wedding of the year, reported in the Guyana newspapers, right, on July the 12th, 1959. The bride wore chantilly lace over slipper satin. Her headdress was a coronet of seed pearls. She was bedecked with diamante necklace and earrings to match. The wedding portrait was taken at Lee's photo studio of High Street, where mounted police were called out to control the huge crowd which was gathered there. Later, two platoons of riot squad men were rushed to the wedding reception area to ease a traffic jam. And there was another report of a case of something about yellow tie men, because apparently gay men around those times used to wear yellow ties to sort of be their sign. But again, this is sort of written in this way, which seemed to show that people existed, people lived. Um, that there was this wedding happening, and in fact, there was a mention in the extended article of some of the different people who were in attendance. In 1966, there is a story, probably sad, of 65-year-old Caroline Vaughan, um, where it's a 65-year-old patient at the New Amsterdam Hospital. New Amsterdam is the second largest town in Guyana, who apparently had was born neither male nor female, but lived as a woman. And then on her death, and as she was dying, when the doctors and nurses attended to her, they discovered that her genitals had not been fully developed either way. In 1968, there is this report. You remember we're talking about the cross-dressing law, but a young man, Compton Bowen of Baggotsville, was found wearing a mini skirt on Sunday, and he was ordered to be sent to the Georgetown Hospital for psychiatric treatment. This order was made by the magistrate Aubrey Bishop. He pleaded guilty to the charge of wearing the clothing for an improper purpose. According to the prosecutor, on Sunday morning, they saw Bowen strolling along Water Street wearing a miniskirt and carrying a wallet, and the prosecutor said that Bowen was twisting his waist from side to side like a female. And then in 1978, there's a report in the Citizen of sex change operations. And these two, it seems as though there were two operations, and the guy's second transsexual in 13 months is now resting at the Georgetown Hospital after what was described as a successful operation. The 24-year-old, described as a competent seamstress, was wheeled into the theater man and came out some 90 minutes later with all of the physical attributes of a woman thanks to the surgeon's sharp knives. At last, my dream has come true. And the patient said that she has informed the nursing staff that she will be known as Sabrina. And again, this is in the public hospital, so to all intents and purposes, Sabrina did not have to pay for this operation. And I understand that Sabrina lives in Guyana, though, lives as a woman and does not necessarily want to be interviewed as someone who had gone through this. In 1979, life got a little bit more interesting when a barrister at law, Stanley Moore, in defending a client, and he said that the time was come that Guyana should amend the laws to permit homosexual relations between consenting adults, since the United Kingdom had already amended these laws. And this was made in court, and Mr. Stanley Moore later on became a minister of Home Affairs in Guyana, and then he went on to serve as a judge in the Caribbean and in Botswana. And and this case was very interesting. Is that two police were chasing someone who had stolen, and they came across Mr. Brotherson and another man, and they arrested them. So um, I and then now 2001, things became more interesting again. Guyana was going through its constitutional reform. Um, the South Africa had just completed its constitutional reform, and South Africa had included sexual orientation as one of the provisions or one of the grounds for non-discrimination in its constitution. So in Guyana, our parliament actually voted in 2001 for an amendment, but the president did not agree to that amendment because there was a lot of prayers. He prayed with and fasted with a lot of Christian evangelicals, one of whom became his colleague in his political party, the then President Barry Jagdeo. And so in 2003, the constitutional amendment came back in Parliament, and then it disappeared down one of our parliamentary black holes, where these things which they don't want to discuss disappear down. In 2005, so around 2003, SASA was formed and organized, and the first Painting the Spectrum, the LGBT Film Festival, happened in 2005. And that film festival has continued annually since then. In 2010, um, Quincy McEwen and others brought the constitutional challenge to the cross-dressing laws after they were arrested again. And very often what happens is that transgender sex workers are doubly penalized. They use the loitering laws and they use these cross-dressing laws to penalize them. So in 2010 this happened. The challenge was brought, and justice takes some time. Meanwhile, the Universal Periodic Review, the Human Rights Council, made a recommendation to Ghana for equality for LGBTQ citizens. In 2012, a parliamentary select committee was formed to consider the decriminalization of consensual adult same-sex relations and discrimination against lesbians, gays, bisexual, and transgender persons. So these words were actually said in Parliament, and that is really important. In 2013, a decision was handed down in a cross-dressing case. And basically, the acting Chief Justice said it's okay to cross-dress except if it's for an improper purpose, and that the law is fine as it stands, even though there was no, and the case is under appeal. In 2013, a cadre survey finds that 58% of Guyanese are either tolerant or accepting of homosexuals, while 17% are not decided. So it's only about a quarter of our population seems are homophobic. So in 2014, the first time a government official at a diplomatic cocktail party talks about the difficulty and so on about decriminalizing same-sex relations in Guyana. That was the then PPP Advice on Governance, Ms. Gail Teixeira. In 2014 as well, there were protests against violence and the lack of justice for victims of violence, and against homophobic comments by religious leaders. And I want to play a news clip here, which shows and shows you of some kind of visibility that many of the LGBT citizens um, do to get attention to the discrimination they face.
Sexual minority groups say they fear increased persecution and have been speaking out about what they intend to do about it. Ryerson reports.
While President Donald Ramatari is saying that he has no problem with the lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender community and he is against discrimination towards the group, some members of that group told reporters that they want laws to protect them.
Looking at discrimination, which we do know that is all over the world, but we try to pull it up more because there's a lot of politicians, who are very serious and concerned about it. And even in the station now, because you need to get understanding that everywhere you go now, you understand you should not be discriminated, whether who you be or whatever sex or whatever gender. So these are the policy that we're hoping that the president of Guyana can do and look into it, and also those parliamentarians, they can revoke some of those old colonial laws and put it in a different bracket now for us.
We need rights that any human being could have. We don't want gay rights. We need rights that every human being could have. That is what we're looking for, that we must have a right to speak for ourselves, a right to dress in the way how we feel like.
And the community intends to treat with their security more seriously since, in their view, plying their trade is getting dangerous.
Try to step up our ability and be more brutal now. And when I said brutal, I don't want people to feel that to me, everybody that come place to us, we might do them things or anything, but what we say, we'll be who we are. At the end of the day, we consider ourselves as men, but we enjoy ourselves as women in our lifestyle. But I'm seeing that this incident has touched us, we decide, no, there's a big step.
President Ramatari over the weekend suggested that the sexual minority groups not be discriminated against when it comes to employment opportunities and access to government services. The rights group SASOD has called on Ramatari to fire his junior finance minister Juan Edgel over what they see as hate speech against sexual minority groups. But Ramatari over the weekend said he has not studied what Edgel said. Edgel had described homosexuality as destructive, wholesome, unhealthy, and told a local radio program it should not be tolerated in the Guyanese society. Reporting for Capital News, Ryerson.
So in 2015, Guyana and Trinidad had elections, and it was interesting how sexual orientation came up in those elections. The manifestos of the two main contenders for Guyana, the APNU plus AFC coalition and the People's Progressive Party Civic, both of them mentioned the commitment of those political entities to putting an end to discrimination against to putting an end to discrimination against person because of their sexual orientation. So there's a commitment to gender equality in the APNU plus AFC. They recognize that gender equality is an intrinsic basic human right. We commit to putting in place measures which will ensure that all vulnerable groups in our society, including women, children, persons with disabilities, rural and indigenous women, youth, the elderly, and the sick and the pregnant, and those marginalized because of sexual orientation are protected and not discriminated against. And in the same way, the other party, the people which was then ruling and it is now in opposition, said same kind of thing. We believe that all Guyanese must be free to make choices and must not be discriminated against because of their ethnicity, gender, religion, or sexual orientation. Over in Trinidad and Tobago, the then governing People's Partnership, which is now in opposition, also had in their manifesto, the People's Partnership is committed to all citizens enjoying equal human rights under the law and to ensuring that there is no discrimination on the basis of race, religion, gender, place of residence, political affiliation, or sexual orientation. But then what has been happening from 2015 to now, certainly in Guyana, is this very interesting dynamic where public officials, ministers, and so talk about the anti-discrimination, but there are no real moves to changing any of the laws. In May 2015, Guyana had its most recent general elections, and there was a change in government. So the new president, David Granger, generated this headline in January 2016, President to Respect LGBT Rights. On one of the programs in which he spoke with reporters, he noted that he is prepared to respect the rights of any adult to indulge in any practice which is not harmful to others. And he says that, basically the government should be respecting the human rights of individuals. In another conversation, he had also said, however, that he does not believe any religious, right, he respects religious views, he does not believe any religion should be imposing itself on any other person. The First Lady, Mrs. Sandra Granger, has been on record in different fora, and the First Lady is very active. She's very concerned about vulnerable communities, and she spoke. She's on record in the newspaper, and this is what the quotation to her. She believes that rights are rights, and that in order to build a cohesive society, we must respect and value each other regardless of race, creed, or sexual orientation. And that, the level of CARICOM, which is the Caribbean community, which is mostly the Anglophone countries, that there should be some changes. Now, however, the First Lady is not necessarily, but she might be a leader and be a role model. She's not necessarily a member of the government. SASOD has been doing advocacy with ministers, and there are many beautiful pictures of ministers meeting with SASOD and other representatives on LGBT issues. Here is the then Minister of Social Protection, Valda Lawrence. Lovely picture, and there are commitments from Mrs. Lawrence, who is currently the Minister of Health, on her, her saying that she's opposed to discrimination. And just after that picture, this is another headline generated by that minister. We're at we're at a cocktail party. She said that she acknowledged the existence of the LGBT community and the problems with discrimination. The new Minister of Social Cohesion generated this headline, that he's committed to addressing the issues facing the LGBT community. And in another section, that there was another headline that says that he will defend the LGBT community, right? So we have, again, more ministers talking. There's this interesting discussion from the Minister of Foreign Affairs that legalizing homosexuality is no straightforward matter. It wasn't straight. It didn't seem to be this is evil and people should change and this is against Guyana, but that it is that there was an issue where Guyana has to acknowledge its religious groupings, and that this comment was made just after Guyana voted against funding for United Nations Special Rapporteur. However, it was very measured. He made it clear that his administration respects the rights of all persons, but must take into consideration certain implications before signing on to resolutions. That is not to say the government is against the LGBT community. So again, you're getting this kind of, we know, but we're scared of these bogeymen, this God religion. And this is very similar to what his opposition counterpart had said in a cocktail party early in 2014, that again, it was 200 years. It took years for women and for the abolition of slavery. So it seems as though Guyana, no matter how well-meaning the politicians, or no matter how much of the donor agencies and the government's liquor that they drink, that they're not really going to do anything, either opposition or government, about changing any of the laws beyond speaking about it. Here is a beautiful picture of our Attorney General, and this again is at a SASOD event where there's a beautiful rainbow flag next to the Attorney General. And in these lovely statements, which generated, wonderful statements which should not have generated controversy, right, is that this is where the Attorney General had announced that apparently he announced that there was going to be a referendum on gay rights in Guyana. And of course, that generated a lot of concern and outrage. But in this, the government noted that the Guyanese people are to decide in a referendum whether homosexuality should remain a criminal offense. Now, but of course, but the unfortunate, the thing is, he also said, um, to, you know, in, today, today I implore you to continue advocating for equality and justice for all citizens, regardless of sexual orientation. Be on the right side of history. And this is unfortunate that the referendum generated much more publicity than, say, these nice comments from an attorney general who himself has generated a lot of controversy for his behavior in court and for his seeming inability to win any cases. The Minister of State, however, after the referendum comment on I shall wait for that airplane to pass. The Minister of State, after the referendum comment, said that the government never proposed a referendum on gay sex laws. And these headlines are interesting. It hits home to what we're talking about. And that basically the ministers had not discussed the decriminalization of buggery. And I had this vision of, cabinet talking about gay sex over coffee and discussing it, but that didn't happen, and cabinet probably was preoccupied with other matters. And and again in this statement that um, he referred back to the government's position. This is Harman again, that the president, the government's position is that there should be no discrimination against any citizen, and that the last official position he maintained, made clear by His Excellency, which is that the government respects the right of any individual to engage in practices which are not harmful to others. And then for a follow-up with the Attorney General, he promised SASA to review the anti-discrimination laws and to protect LGBT persons. And of course, not much has happened since then. But these are nice, it's nice pictures, nice conversations, and so happening. So one would wonder, so what's stopping? And this is where we should take on God and wondering where God is in all of this. Another minister who affirmed the LGBTQ community is the Minister of Education, and this is a press release from the Ministry of Education in Guyana, which is headlined, "The government reaffirms its support for the LGBTQ community," and its headline is that the recognition of the community, and there is the full explaining of all the initials. It is not an addendum to the agenda of the government, as it is not an anomaly of nature. Support and a good life for all of our people is what this government is all about. And this is positive. This is very encouraging. Again, I think this is perhaps one of the most direct and affirming statements from any minister within the Caribbean region recently. The problem that I have with this kind of approach is that Guyana has not done anything about outlawing corporal punishment in our schools. And this is an extract of a text which describes the issues around corporal punishment. Corporal punishment is lawful in schools under Article 9 of our Criminal Offences Act and Article 7 of our Summary Jurisdiction Offences Act. The Education Act makes no reference to corporal punishment, but in 2002, the ministerial guidelines state how children must be beaten. It must be administered by the head teacher, deputy head teacher, or designated senior teacher, and only for certain offenses, including use of indecent language. Boys should be punished on their hands or buttocks, girls on their hands, and there is even a description of the weapon to be used. The punishment should be inflicted with a cane or strap no longer than 24 inches and not in the presence of other learners. And all punishments should be recorded in the misdemeanors book. Now we know that in Guyana, this doesn't happen. Any teacher can beat any child. And sometimes these cases come to light when the children are physically injured, and parents bring this up. And in fact, not around the same time that the minister was affirming the support for the LGBT community at the residence of the British High Commissioner, another child could, had his buttocks so damaged she could not sit for a long time. So intersectionality. So it's interesting on the one hand that you can have this rhetoric, you can have a lot of rhetoric and a lot of talk. But while talk might be good and you can ascribe certain positive energies to certain kind of talk, you have to question really where's humanity in this and where's intersectionality in all of this, because you can't be protecting LGBT citizens while abusing children. It makes no sense to do that. And certainly I, as a person who's interested in LGBT equality, does not want to, would like to see all of these issues dealt with. But not only the government officials. Here's what the former president, now leader of the opposition, had to say about God in 2017.
While there has been no official word from the state on the issue, both Foreign Affairs Minister Carl Greenidge and Legal Affairs Minister Basil Williams have publicly stated that government will be moving to hold a referendum to determine whether same-sex intimacy should be decriminalized. But the Guyana Trans United have since objected to such a move and called on the coalition administration to fulfill its manifesto promise of ensuring that the lesbian, gays, bisexual, and transgender community and other minority groups are not discriminated against. However, when asked about the matter at a press conference on Wednesday, Jack Dio posited that he does not believe Guyana is ready for same-sex marriage, given the reactions of persons during consultations done under the PPP's regime.
I don't think the country, based on what our consultations show among what large numbers of people, is ready for like the same-sex marriage and all of those things.
According to the former president, during those consultations, there was a big uproar about legalizing same-sex marriages.
You will recall that there was a constitutional a vote, and there was a huge outcry in the country about the making it a fundamental right, because people said this is not a fundamental right. And so, because if it did, if we had done that, passed that, then the Marriage Act would have been illegal. And so both sides, because of what the religious community and others, the NGOs came up with, we decided not to go to that level.
In addition, Jagdeo posited that Guyanese do not want anyone to be discriminated against because of their sexual preference, and as such, he outlined the need for the laws to be changed in order to reflect this position.
I think the fact that these issues are still on our law books, but we don't hear, it's like the death penalty. We have not had anyone executed throughout my entire tenure, and I don't think Janet too, 97, the last time. And so similarly, in the books we have some of these provisions in place, but people in practice, they have not people have not been charged on the basis of these issues anymore. The laws must reflect our practices and our general law. So the laws at some point in time may have to change.
In this regard, the opposition leader noted that his party is ready to engage government in discussions on how to move forward with this issue. Reporting for the Evening News, Vanu Manakchand.
So, if so many politicians on all sides of the National Assembly are opposed to discrimination against LGBT citizens, then who are they afraid of? Is it God? So this is from a 2001 announcement in the newspapers. The leaders of the Christian community called the nation of Guyana to repent, fast, and pray for God's intervention to stop the legalization of homosexuality and all other forms of sexual immorality which would contribute to the destruction of our society and invite God's judgment on Guyana. So there were 3 days of fast in Guyana. Two Guyanas, the president at the time attended the fast along with the former president, Janet Jagan. So this, of course, was all happening at the time when the parliament had voted in favor of the legislation to include sexual orientation as a grounds for non-discrimination. And this was, this whole full-page advertisement. So this was in 2001. So, but things then became more peculiar because in 16 years later, this is around January 2001, 16 years later, we had this letter to Donald Trump. Dear President Trump, we write to you as concerned Christian ministers and churches from the Caribbean, including the Bahamas, who hope and pray that the United States, under your leadership, will once again cast a light from the city upon a hill, of which your American forefathers and President Ronald Reagan so frequently spoke. Sadly, the city has cast shadows instead of light, and we refer specifically to the policies of the United States State Department that have undertaken to coerce our countries into accepting a mistaken version of marriage. And the letter goes on to talk about the Obama administration, speak out against it. And then in conclusion, the letter said, we implore you urgently to review this matter, to revoke the relevant executive orders and policies, and restore to the city upon a hill the bright moral beam that once shone from it. Please accept our heartfelt prayers for your success in making America morally great again. Now, this letter would have been easy to have been dismissed, but there were 289 signatures from Christian leaders in the Bahamas, Guyana, St. Martin, St. Vincent, Trinidad, and Tobago. But there were 165 of those 289 signatures. 165 Guyanese Christians, some of them very senior in the hierarchy in Guyana, both in their religious life and often consulted for engagement in secular life, and they hoped that Donald Trump would save Guyana from gay marriage and from LGBT equality. As I was preparing this lecture and I read this letter and I read the signatures and I felt this deep sense of shame to understand that there are Guyanese who would appeal to Donald Trump, to President Donald Trump, because they feel as though they have no alternative and that is the last resort. And they're going to pray for that kind of morality, Donald Trump's kind of morality, as opposed to a morality which advocates equality. So God in Guyanese usually exists in different ways. There's Anglican, Methodist, Pentecostal, Catholic, Jehovah's Witness, Baha'i, Muslim, Hindu, Rastafarian, Seventh-day Adventists, other Christians. And I'll just show you some examples from Guyana and the Caribbean of how people have expressed, the religious leaders have also expressed their opposition to discrimination. So we think that in Guyana you would assume that maybe things are going easy and that we're getting some progress and that the sections of the religious community have better things to deal with. And then there was this march in August of 2017 where Linden, which is the third largest town in Guyana, there was this march on a Saturday afternoon where a particular bishop who has a large following, shouted a lot of negative comments about homosexuals and homosexuality. And I remember one woman who attended the march, she went to cover it, she said she wanted to cry. She could not believe the hate and the madness that was being spouted when when people thought that things had changed. In Jamaica for this week, while other people are, while other pastors and so have tried to change perceptions, the famous Stephen Anderson, who had been banned from Botswana, South Africa, United Kingdom, Canada, because of very hateful speech and language, is apparently going to go to Jamaica with the support of some of Jamaica's top homophobic Christians to preach and spread his gospel of hate. But the thing is that in addition, but that in the Caribbean, of course, is that there are religious leaders um, who speak out against the discrimination. This is one article here again of a SASL event, which was mobilized in June last year, and where people like the head of the Roman Catholic Diocese in Guyana, they, you know, um, it, spoke at that, spoke in favor of non-discrimination. The head of the Guyana Presbyterian Church also spoke about respect and doing away with discrimination. The head of the Anglican Communion in Guyana sent a message again, speaking out against the homophobic discrimination, and there was a representative of a Muslim who spoke in her own rights, and then Pandit Tilak of the Sri Samaya Puran Mariamman Temple also, spoke against this colonial legacy. So there are religious persons who speak. In Barbados, there is a report from the Archbishop of the West Indies and Anglican Bishop of Barbados, who says that don't condemn people. And also in Jamaica, as we said, the um, Anglican Bishop of Jamaica also said it's time to do away with laws and to do away with the homophobic laws. In Guyana, there's a complex relationship between the state and religion. And January this year, the Minister of Public Health, the LGBT-loving Minister, Valda Lawrence, had to hold a prayer service. And the man who led the prayer service, Pastor McGowan, is one of the people who had appealed to Donald Trump to stop gay marriage from coming to Guyana. So maybe all prayers are being answered. Who knows? So Hinduism is the faith of thousands of citizens in Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago, and Suriname. And there are Hindu communities in the other parts of the Caribbean, practiced mostly by those who descended from the Indian indentured immigrants. Indian and Hindu traditions record the diversity in sexual orientation and gender identity. There's certainly no punishment like the blistering of the penis or imprisonment. And in fact, the punishment for a Brahmin who has engaged in homosexual activity is that he must bathe with all his clothes on. So some Hindus in the Caribbean have spoken against discrimination and have also advocated, because also this perception that this Caribbean is this Christian place and that must aspire to be this Christian homophobic place. So I want to share with you, because I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with Hindu thought and tradition, I just wanted to share with you these other perspectives, because I thought that the representation of the Caribbean should reflect diversity. The first clip is a short one. Swami Aksharananda from Guyana, respected Hindu leader, sometimes controversial. He had an interview in April 2013, and he was asked about his views on discrimination against LGBTIQ citizens. So that's the first clip. The second clip goes to show a little bit of the thought that sometimes has to go into how we understand religion. And this is a clip from Dr. Arvinder Singh of Trinidad and Tobago. And he is an electrical engineer and also a Sanskrit scholar. And there was a conference, Queering Hinduism, the Alternative Hindu Discourse on Alternative Lifestyles, which was held in June 2015. And I'm glad to play that short clip so that you can get a glimpse of the thought, as I said, and of the ways in which people think about their faith and their spirituality.
is an example.
My personal view is that people, from a Hindu point of view, and personally also, we really are not troubled by people's sexual orientations. It does not constitute an abomination for me. It does not constitute a violation of, as some people say, it is a violation of God. For us, it is not so. You can't violate God. You can't, So from a Hindu, primarily from a Hindu point of view, it is not an abomination for us. We're not going to go and promote a particular lifestyle.
But you wouldn't pronounce judgment?
No, far from it. We would not do that. And I would support an individual in his or her quest for her own integrity. I will have absolutely no problem in saying that I stand by you.
Suppose everyone knows what LGBTH is, and LGBT is, and could guess the H is for Hinduism. Right. So I'll just take you through 2 shlokas, and then sort of look at how the problem develops in the Hindu mind and what I think should be the framework in which we think about it. The first shloka, a lot of you will be familiar with it. Sarve bhavantu sukhinaha, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet. This is a very universal prayer. It is a universal hymn. May all be happy. May all be free from disabilities. May everyone see only auspicious things, and may no one suffer from sorrow. So there is hardly anybody, regardless of religion or if you are an atheist or whatever, that will disagree with this sentiment. And this is really one of the overriding sentiments of Hinduism, one of the guiding principles, and we say it often in the Shanti Path. The second one, now let me go back a little bit. You'll see the 2 things that they frame it in is sukha and dukkha. Sukhinaha means a happy person. Dukkha is a sorrowful person. So these are the 2 things that we are talking about. The second one I want you to look at is from Manusmriti. Sarvam paravasham dukkam, sarvam atmavasham sukham. Etad vidyat samasena lakshanam sukha dukkha yoho. So what is happiness and what is sorrow? Anything under the control of your own power, that is happiness. And whatever is in the control of someone else, that is sorrow. That is the Manu's brief definition of what is happiness and what is sorrow. The implication of this, I think, in these issues is that by demonizing, shaming, and even legislating against the fundamental nature of people, we are placing their very being under the control of others, paravasha, which means we are actively creating a society with sorrow of the most deep-rooted kind. And if we want to actively move towards a society where sarve sukhinaha is true, all are happy, then we must continuously strive to create a society where people are really limited only by themselves. So this is, in case I run out of time, the thesis of what I want to say, the Hindu thought and how it applies to the issue. So
how are we making this happy society? It seems, therefore, that there are attempts of people to try to speak out against discrimination without actually changing laws or creating new legislation. In 1996 in Guyana, there is a Gender-Neutral Domestic Violence Act, and there's also a Gender-Neutral Sexual Offences Act. A couple of years ago, the Ministry of Health had a policy against stigma and discrimination, which was very clear, though it wasn't. The policy is a bit strange in that it had no accountability. The 2008 National Domestic Violence Policy, which has not been renewed since it expired, but at that time it acknowledged that there was domestic violence in same-sex relationships and that service providers had to help people who wanted to escape those relationships. The University of Guyana has policies against discrimination, and they make special reference to sexual preference, those words, quote unquote. In 2014, there was a project by UNDP, which is based on HIV, um, and there were municipal declarations by the town councils at the time in Linden and New Amsterdam, which spoke to respecting the dignity and worth of every person without distinction on the basis of race, color, sex, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, and also to renounce homophobia. So, um, then of course, we've had local government elections since, so we don't know if these declarations still hold or if the new councils are aware of them. The 2015 Elections Code of Conduct for Political Parties said that that the politicians should not be discriminating against sexual orientation. In other words, making any references to using slurs, using homophobia to generate support. And then in 2018, this last weekend, I was browsing the newspapers, and then I realized that our Ministry of Finance, the National Procurement and Tender Agency, the supplier registration form has given an options for gender as male, female, or other. And this is perhaps the first time in Guyana, because certainly the National Census or none of the other documents which ask for gender suggest other as an alternative. So this is all interesting, and it's very much there. So my conclusion, just briefly after that hour, and for those of you who are still with me, is that the Caribbean and Guyana are probably not going to change any laws soon. There is a fear of God, but people seem to be finding ways of working around the laws, and perhaps in God's sight. Before I finish, I would like to introduce you to a couple of Caribbean IRN resources, and I'm sure, and I will hope to share around a kind of sheet with some links on it, so that you can access those in your own time if you're interested. So we have our website at www.caribbeanhomophobias.org. It is a 2012 collection, which had some reports from activists, different, and I believe some of this is on your reading list already. It showed some creative writing, film and performance art, interviews, and critical essays at the time from Caribbean citizens, both living in the Caribbean and from the diaspora. Last year, we launched Sexualities.org, and again, this has some. This is going to be an important kind of collection. The first thing is Write It in Fire, tributes to Michelle Cliff. Michelle Cliff was a poet and author, and there's our some extracts from the Sargasso journal which we had published, and there are some again, some of it is in Spanish. We have our Digital Library of the Caribbean collection, where we host just random bits of archival material, and then two special collections. The Gay Freedom Movement of Jamaica. That was formed in 1974 in Jamaica. They had the Jamaica Gay News, and they tried to have different kinds of programs and activities. So this was in the 1970s in Jamaica. But it had to, Larry Chang, who coordinated, eventually had to leave. So this, here there's some different documents from that time, typewriter. This is the day before computers, so everything was done in typewriter. Laid out, the Jamaica Daily News was sent out around the Caribbean, things like that. And then we also have in our collection, I just show for, I was telling you about Mohangu and Nabi Bakhti's story. So what we have here are the documents which Gayatri Bahadur shared. She collected them from the archives in the UK, and she just shared some details of what was happening in relation to that case, scans of those images. So these are just some of the things that you will see.